So thank you so much. So now I will start my second lecture, that is on artificial intelligence and machine learning in earthquake engineering. So morning, we had our first session where I spoke about the regression analysis. Now I'm going to speak about some little bit complicated things compared to my first lecture. So now before I start, I think morning also I showed you, I think many people are asking, like what textbook and what softwares we have used. I just saw in the YouTube itself. So now all my, whatever lectures I have given, so morning and afternoon, as already I mentioned, now also I'm mentioning, I have followed this book, Machine Learning Methods in Environmental Sciences. So this book is from Cambridge University Press, and you can go through, if you are not able to follow my lectures, so you can go through this book. The theory I have followed from this book itself. And then now coming to the softwares, as many of you are asking, so we have used this MATLAB. MATLAB has a deep learning toolbox, ANN toolbox, and today now in this lecture also whatever I'm talking, so auto encoders, nonlinear principal component analysis, everything all are in MATLAB itself. Now apart from this MATLAB thing, this book, this book also contains some software, like he has developed his own codes like NLPCA and other things. So that is also written in MATLAB itself. So if you want, this book has that softwares of MATLAB, small programs he has given, you can use it. And nowadays MATLAB also has inbuilt routines, so you can directly use this software itself. So now coming to my lecture, so morning, you see, as already I told you, I have spoken about this regression analysis. So now I have shown you, see, where to use ANN, like, why ANN is required here. We just have a quick recap. Say, I already mentioned you see, the data is very, very small. The human things are much better, actually. Ordinary regressions are much better. But when the data, when you're having very large amounts of data, so then, the power of neural networks you really see in the regression. Now, as already I mentioned, any regression analysis, the most fundamental thing is you should be able to explain the data with less number of unknowns and less variance, of the less mean square error. So if you can do that compared to the ordinary regressions, then you are a winner, and you can use that you followed, right? It is much better, actually. And now in the afternoon lecture, so I'm going to talk about this dimensionality reduction. That is, generally it comes under the unsupervised learning kind of a thing. But I don't know. See, the technique is known as unsupervised. But if you want to do person who has worked in this area, then you will be able to do this unsupervised learning in efficient fashion. So now here I am going to discuss now the principal component analysis and nonlinear principal component analysis, where you use this neural network for this nonlinearity. And then finally, I will show you some auto encoders application in earthquake engineering. So whatever I will be going to show you, I will show, because I am a structural engineer working in earthquake engineering. Most of my examples will be from earthquake engineering, real life examples itself. But whatever I am showing you, you can easily translate it to your own, the areas itself. And so now here I say, why do we require this, this dimensional reduction kind of a thing. So now I showed you in the morning itself, say like Japan, this is a Japan thing. Japan is very well instrumented. I told you also, like every 100 meters or 50 meters, you have so many equipments. So they all, whenever an earthquake occurs, you see all these instruments trigger. So we get huge amounts of data for earthquake in Japan. Now in India also, I showed you, these are the strong motion instruments. I think some 300 or 400 are operating in our Himalayan and the Indo-Ganga basin. So whenever there is any earthquakes, you will get data from all these stations itself. Now the fundamental question what arises here is whether you require this much dense instruments. Like now, as I told you, sensors have become very cheap. It doesn't mean that if they are becoming very cheap, so you have to instrument, you see, every corner, every hook and corner, and collect data. And then you see, what are you going to do with this type of data? As already I told you, when the data is less, it is human beings, you see, we can easily understand. But when the data is, you see, 100 terabytes, you see, 200 terabytes of data, our human mind, cannot take this amount of dimensionality, and it becomes, you see, very, very, you see, problem and the challenging thing in earthquake or even in any type of applications. So like this is one more thing I'm showing you, like deviating from earthquake. So this Indian Meteorological Department, all of you know that for India, you see, rainfall is very important, summer monsoon. So these are the rain gauge stations actually. So you can see these red colors are all the rain gauge stations. So now all these instruments gives you the amount of rainfall of rainfall data. Now the question will be whether you have to instrument whole India to collect this rainfall data. Like, can you do some kind of optimum things? Like there may be areas where you have to put more instrument, or you have to capture the trend in the data. So now, how many stations are required? Like you see. So the question arises is, you see, how many stations are required? How many optimum things are required here? And now when you put so much dense instrumentation, say, then what happens is, you see, there will be similarities. Like for example, if you take data from Ganga Basin, if you put instrument nearby, so both of them will have some type of similarities in the data, or maybe similarities here, similarities 5,000 stations are there, multiplied by, you see, every hour rainfall if you collect for a whole year, then it is in too much information actually, and it is very, very difficult to, you see, handle this type of data sets. And there may be duplicates also, because you are measuring, densely. There may be same information may getting recorded at several places. So now the question comes, you see, whether instead of analyzing this database as a whole, can we group them actually? Okay, so like instead of understanding each station, say, if you can group them, you can understand, you see, how this group is behaving, and you can get some nice, you see, conclusions from this data. It is something like, we do in our classroom. You see, nowadays, I don't know other places, say, like we are having, you see, 150 students in my class. Say, I can't reach each and every student. I can't solve, each and every student problem, because so many students are there. So what we do is, in our classroom, when we conduct an exam, you see, we have the CGPA, like S grade, A grade, B grade. So we group these students. Now, if I know that that student comes from some C type a group or D type group, I know how to help that person, and then, you say, I can make some, help him and to get better grades or something like that. So the same, classification here. So we have large amounts of database. So now what I'm looking for is, I want to group them actually. So if I group them, that means is I'm decreasing the dimensionality of the data. So from 5,000 rain gauge stations, if I say that they can be grouped into some 6 groups or 7 groups, so my understanding becomes very easy, and I can draw some, you see, the meaningful conclusions from these approaches. So that is what, you see, identifying clusters, in the database itself. So now this is also one more problem I am showing you in earthquake engineering. So this is a whole globe I am showing you here. So these are all the epicenters of earthquakes all over the globe occurring for the past some 100 years. This full database is available online, in USGS website. Anybody can go and download this data set itself. So now if you see this epicenters, they all follow some type of a pattern kind of a thing. So now here also, I would be interested. See, there are something around, you see, almost some 1 lakh or 10 lakh earthquakes are there. Now studying each and every earthquake, it's very difficult. We will not be able to identify. So here also the idea is whether I can group them into some type of a group. Then I can get a better understanding of this data set itself. So this is a challenge. So now similarly, in the morning, I showed you the buildings, the same that Burj Dubai Tower. As already I told you, every floor has been instrumented in Burj Dubai. And you have all kinds of, you name any instrument, it is there in Burj Dubai. Accelerometer, gyroscope, or global display, all kinds of instruments are there. And it is getting continuously monitored. So now, as already I told you in the morning, we have almost, you see, 100 terabytes, or maybe, this number was the last year. Now maybe 200 terabytes of data. And this data is all highly correlated, because you are measuring the same thing with some other instrument or some other floor or something. So now what type of a decision, you see, we can get from this type of data? So this is a problem, you see, which we are facing in the dimensionality of the data is a very big problem, you see, in this earthquake engineering or in structural engineering. This was this principal component analysis, which is a very most popular technique we use to decrease the dimensionality. See, this principal component analysis was started by this Pearson in 1901, and there are many textbooks, and it's a very well documented kind of a thing nowadays. And MATLAB, you have simply the PCA command is there. If you do it, you will get the principal components. Now, principal components is nothing new for civil engineering. See, all of in your undergraduate in mechanics of material or strength of material course, all of you would have done this principal stresses and principal planes. Everybody knows you. How did you get principal stress and principal planes right? So you all know that stress is a tensor, 3 by 3 matrix kind of a thing. Generally in mechanics second year, BTech, you would have studied only 2 by 2 matrix kind of a thing. That's on a plane. So now, as all of you know that if you rotate the coordinate system, say, you all know that the stress tensor changes actually. So now what we do is in our in mechanics of materials, we try to rotate the coordinate system such that where the shear stresses becomes zero, which will be having only normal stresses. So we call that as the principal stress, and the plane we call them as the principal plane kind of a thing. And here is a Mohr circle, which widely used thing here. So you can see this is a point A and point B. Say these are the principal stresses. So A is the maximum principal stress, and B is, you can say, the minimum principal stress kind of a thing you have. So principal component analysis is exactly same as this itself actually. So now the main advantage in principal stresses is you know the maximum amount of a stress, and you can also find out the minimum. So it gives something like the bound kind of thing. So now if you have a 3x3 stress matrices, you can reduce them into three eigenvalues itself, and the first one, the largest one, you can use it in the design actually. So this is how we are reducing the dimensionality of the problem itself. So principal component analysis is also exactly the same as whatever principal stresses you have done. So principal stress are also like your eigenvalues and eigenvector. Principal component is also like your eigenvalue and then this eigenvector kind of a thing. So now stresses, but when you do principal component analysis on data, the most important thing is this covariance actually. Okay, so most of you may be knowing this one. Just just a quick recap kind of a thing. As all of what do you mean by variance? It is everybody knows that the variance indicates the spread of the data, like around the mean value, how much spread. So if the spread is too much set, then the variance will be very high, and if the spread is very small, then variance will be lower. And then you have this covariance also. Covariance is generally used for two types of random variables. If you're having two dimensions, so that is a two random variables are there. So covariance tells you between one dimension and the other dimension, like they were spread around other mean and then spread around this mean, you will get this covariance matrix. And as all of covariance matrix is a symmetric matrix like our stress tensor. Covariance of x comma y will be same as covariance of y comma x. So now in the principal components, what to do is that we find out the eigenvalues of this covariance matrix. So you will get the eigenvalue. The first one, we is the principal component one. The second one we call as principal component two, same as our principal stresses. So in principal stresses, you do this eigenvalue analysis for the stress tensor. The first one, the maximum, we call as a maximum principal stress. Next one we call as the maximum principal, right, and minimum principal stress kind of a thing. So here you do this eigenvalue analysis for covariance data X. So there is no difference between principal components and principal stresses. And the principal planes there, here we call them as eigenvectors or principal vector or something like that we call here itself. So the thing is exactly same. Only thing, instead of stress, we do for covariance matrix. Nothing, no difference between these two approaches. So now coming to this principal component. So this is how it works. See, like this X, all these things are nothing but the data itself. So now this data is on a two-dimensional plot. X1, X2 are the coordinates. So you can see the data is scattered is like that actually. So in principal components, what we are doing is like same as what we are doing in the principal stresses. So we are rotating the coordinate system. See, now Y1, Y2 is a new coordinate system and they're orthogonal to each other. So we have rotated the coordinate system from X1, X2 to Y1, Y2 coordinate system. So now the advantage here is you can see along the Y1 axis, okay. So the data is nicely spread along the Y1 axis. And if you try to measure the standard deviation, so like for example, if you find out the standard deviation with respect to X1 axis, the standard variance will be very less. And with respect to X2 also variance is less, but when you rotate here, the variance around this Y1 axis will be extremely high. So now in principal components, what we do is we rotate the coordinate system, we find out this new coordinate, here the advantage is the variance along Y1 axis is maximum and the variance along Y2 axis, here you can see the spread is very, very small. It is a minimum kind of a thing. So now it is same as you see the principal plane, the first principal plane, the second principal plane. So the first principal plane carries the maximum amount of stress. The second principal plane carries the minimum amount of stress here. So the same concept appears in here. Instead of stress, we do for the variance itself. So now the advantage in the principal components is now the basically the problem is the two-dimensional data. But when you rotate and is very, very small, so you can see that the whole problem has been reduced to one dimension. So from 2D we have come to 1D. So this is how we can reduce the dimensionality using our principal component analysis. It is nothing is same as your principal stresses or your eigenvalue problem itself. So this is also one more example I'm showing you here. So here the data has been plotted in 3 dimensions, x1, x2, x3 coordinate system. And now you wrote new coordinate system. So the main advantage is along PC1 axis, you can see the maximum spread is there. So this PC1 contains the maximum variance here, and PC3 also contains the variance in the along this direction, and along PC2 direction, so the variance is 0. Basically the data is only 2 dimension, or maybe you can reduce it to 1D because variance in other direction is very small. So the principal components helps us to understand is to decrease the dimensionality of our problem itself. So now this is also the same, the principal one in the 2-dimensional data you can see. So now what here we are looking for is, this is the data. So now we are not doing fitting any straight line here. What we are looking is, for this data, we are rotating the coordinate system such that, along one direction, the variance becomes maximum, and along other direction, the variance becomes a minimum kind of a thing. So this is what we do in principal component analysis. So now I'm showing you what exactly we do. So like these diamonds you can see here, these are all the data sets available. So generally in linear regression, what we do is we fit a straight line, some y is equal to mx plus c or something. So now you can see these bars are nothing but the error actual. So we try to minimize error between the data and then given by the prediction by the straight line. You can see this is a perfect perpendicular kind of a thing to this straight line, and then we minimize the error and we find out their coefficients. Now in principal components, what we try to do is, we are not fitting any straight line, we are rotating the coordinate system. So here this line is nothing but your coordinate system, essentially your x-axis, you are rotating, and we are maximizing this, minimizing this error. That is, here you can see the error is perpendicular to your coordinate system. So you rotate the coordinate system, take the perpendicular distance, whichever is small, say, you get your principal components. Now in nonlinear regression, say, generally nonlinear regression, what to do, instead of fitting a straight line, we fit some kind of a curve, but the concept is same. We minimize this error between the data and then given by your the curve itself. In nonlinear principal component analysis, what to do is, here because it's a nonlinear set, the coordinate system is no more a straight line kind of a thing. So we fit a curve actually, and then this curve, you can see we calculate the distance of these points from this curve, and then so this is our new coordinate system, which is non-linear. It is not a linear kind of analysis. So this is a basic difference between linear regression, PCA, nonlinear regression, and the nonlinear principal component analysis. Only thing is, what error you are minimizing. So here you are minimizing like this. Here you are minimizing this perpendicular to axis, and here you are not fitting any straight lines here. We are rotating the coordinate system such that the variance becomes maximum in one direction, and other direction it becomes minimum. So now let us see for our global earthquake data itself. So now these are the epicenters, as already I showed you. So this is something like in 100 years data. I think some 10 lakh earthquakes may be there, if you count from 1 magnitude or something. So now we want to identify, the groups are, clusters actually, okay, for this data. And now these are the geological boundaries given by some geologists. They say that, based on geology, some 43 zones there, it seems. Like Himalaya, you can see is zone number 1. So they say that this is a boundary of our Himalayan plate. These are all the plate boundaries. So they have divided it into 43 groups based on some, this geological analysis actually. So now, 43 groups also is a very big number. So now we want to reduce the dimensionality of the problem. So what here you can do is, for each zone, say, we have computed this earthquake, occurrence per year. That is the data for 100 years. You can see one time series I have plotted here, which is nothing but the seismic energy or something like that. That's the magnitude you convert into energy, and then you sum up every year. So for all these zones, you can get a time series like this actually, okay, for the past 100 years. So now once you have a time series, you can do this principal component. Say like, for example, SIT, say, is a time series for zone 1, that is for the Himalaya. Then SJT is a time series at some other station is this one. So you do this covariance matrix, you calculate for all the groups. So 40 groups means 40 by 40 covariance matrix will come. So for this 40 by 40 matrix, you find out eigenvalues. So you have 40 eigenvalues and then 40 eigenvectors you can find out. Among the eigenvalue, the first eigenvalue will have the maximum the variance itself. So the first few eigenvalues itself will be sufficient to explain the database. And then these are the principal the eigenvectors. How do they look like? PC1, PC3, PC5 kind of thing. I'm just showing some samples here. And now you can find out based on the species, you can group this data. like among all the 40 zones, how many of them are highly correlated with PC1 set, because they're orthogonal, you can join them into group 1. Then you know how many are highly correlated with PC2, you can group them into another group. Like that, you can group all this data. So finally, it appears that there are no 40 groups. Basically, you can collapse all these things into some 6 or 7 groups itself. So like for example, if you see the Himalaya, more exactly, you see this behaves in a similar fashion compared to this. So that is the border of the Eurasian plate. And then here also one more small geological boundary is there. So these three are more or less similar to each other in the behavior. And then if you see these lines, a Pacific plate, these are all form under the group 1. So now this way you can, the 40 groups are there, say 40 zones, the dimensionality can be reduced it to some 5 or you follow it, 6 groups itself. That is the advantage of the principal components. Now this is also and Basak in Journal of Climatology. So 1990s, you see there were some 200 rain gauge stations were there in the all over the India, and at each rain gauge they have this rainfall database actually, okay, for the, which has been recorded for some 100 years, something like that. So now what these people have done is also same, exactly same whatever I showed you. They've collected all the rainfall data. They found out the covariance matrix, and they found out eigenvalue, eigenvector kind of a thing, and the stations which are highly correlated with eigenvector related with like that. So finally, it appears that although there are 200 stations, but whole India can be grouped into some 7 or you see the 8 groups. You can see these are all the homogeneous regions actually. You can see this A1, you can see here it is a big group. So all these stations, they fall under nicely one group kind of a thing. And now the peninsular India, so you can see this region, this also falls as one group. But whereas this coastal regions, Karnataka, or Goa, this region, you see, this falls under other kind of into some 6 or 7 groups based on this principal component analysis. And now, in the principal component analysis, I will just demonstrate for this strong motion data. So these are recent work which we carried out, very here. Now, as already we have mentioned there is, the India also several, I have showed you the previously also. There are several instruments are operating in, Himalayas, in the Indo-Ganga basin. And now in the last 10 to 15 years, many earthquakes have occurred, like Sikkim earthquake, Nepal earthquake, many earthquakes. For nowadays, you would have seen in the newspapers like Delhi, many earthquakes are occurring, everybody is talking, right? A huge earthquake is going to come in the Himalayas. So now, for all these earthquakes, we have the strong motion data. So that is acceleration time histories have been recorded. Now the most important thing is how do we identify the damaging data actually? Okay, so which time history will cause the more damage to our data itself. So these are the the records of the earthquakes. Like this, the first one is a earthquake which has been recorded, and this earthquake magnitude was some 4.5 itself. So like this, we have all the data sets. Like in Bhuj, you can see there is the 2001 Gujarat earthquake also. So we have the data at one station, is at Ahmedabad. So like this, so this database is also available online. You can go to this Cosmos, that is a virtual strong motion database. If you go to in Google, if you type Cosmos strong motion database, you can get all these data sets itself. So some earthquakes have been recorded at many places, like 26, 18, 14 stations itself. And now these are recent ones, like the earthquakes which occurred in 2005 and up to 2000 comes under PESMOS website, which is maintained by IIT. You can go to that website, so you can download all these records itself. So in 2011, we have this Sikkim earthquake, which the magnitude was 6.8. You can see the number 35 here. I'm showing here. So this has caused this huge damages in the Gangtok and other places. So it has been recorded 6 stations. So like this, we have all the huge databases available for our India. So now we have the data for 5 magnitude to 4. Of course, we have data for 2 magnitude, 3 magnitude also, but generally, low magnitudes are not damaging for structure, so we ignore this database itself. So now, among these data sets, now we have to identify the strong motion time histories which create maximum damage to our structures. So this is, I am showing you one time history. This is a time history for 7.2 magnitude. I think it is recorded in that India Burma earthquake in 1988 itself. So it has been recorded 292 kilometers. So you can see this is the time history how it looks like actually. So generally, what we peak amplitude, which we call as a peak ground acceleration itself. So this is a peak value of this time history. So, but generally what to do when you are having a time history, it is very difficult to understand. We plot what we call as the power spectral density. So power spectral density tells you which frequency is dominating using. So what is how the shape, the frequency spectra looks like. So you can get from this information. Now, in a similar fashion, so you can nowadays, wavelets, you see Hilbert-Wang transform, many techniques have come, and even MATLAB softwares are available where you can find out this evolutionary power spectral densities. That is how this. So generally, the earthquake time history is what happens. The frequency content, it changes with the time. That's for a non-stationary data. So you can find out how the, in the time, what frequencies were dominant, others also. So these are evolutionary power spectral density plot I'm showing here, obtained from some the empirical mode decomposition. So you can identify spectrums. So now this is also one more time history I'm showing. This is for the Gujarat earthquake. I think some 7 magnitude or 7.8 magnitude here. So you can see, so this earthquake also you see, so this is a time history. So this is a peak value around 0.1 G was there. And then you see, this is our evolutionary power spectral density. So it shows, what frequency was present at what time actually, okay? For non-stationary process, this becomes very important. And this is also the evolutionary power spectral density and the power spectral density for another station, I think some Uttarkashi earthquake itself. So now the thing like this, we have almost some 5,000 or 6,000 time histories are there. Now the question comes, which time history I should use it in design? Like I'm building a new building, in Delhi or some other place. If I want to do a non-linear time history analysis, which time history I have to use actually. And now generally you see, because engineers are more interested in the damage. So the thing is, I would like to use a time history which can create maximum damage to my structure. And the structural damage, this is a very complicated the phenomenon itself. So identifying a time history is extremely difficult in design earthquake engineering. So now what people do in the past is, there are some guidelines are there, like instead of, so you choose based on this type of parameters. Like, in the olden days, the thing was, the people, so people used to choose based on PGS itself. But then they found out that, PGA is not an indicator. They went by this velocity. As you know, that velocity is more related to energy kind of a thing and a nonlinear kind of thing, because energy is conserved. Then people started saying ground velocity is the one which should be the guiding thing to choose among these time histories itself. And there is one more, people say that, earthquake is not a force. It is basically only a displacement, because you're just the ground moves. So they say that, the peak ground displacement should be used to find out the damage itself. And like this, there are several arguments are there, and V by H ratio, the vertical to horizontal, then the predominant frequency is important, central frequency, spectral parameter. Like this, there are so many parameters, has been developed in the literature. Almost, I think, some 21 parameters are there. Like you say, acceleration spectrum intensity, velocity spectrum intensity, so many things are there. Now problem comes, I have some 2 time histories say. So for one time history, I will find out all the these 21 parameters. For other time history also, I will find out all the 20 parameters. Now for one time history, actually ASI will be less. For other time history, velocity spectrum will be less. Now how do we choose actually? Which time history will cause, more damage to my structure? So that is a problem, And the problem here, because you are having a 21 parameter are there to describe this time history, which is in a 21 dimensional space is there. So to choose a time history in for, doing this nonlinear analysis becomes a big, very huge problem. So now in this type of situations, our, the principal component analysis, which is based on linear principles, it works very nicely to take a decision here. So these, as already I told you, the first step in principal components is to find out this covariance matrix or this correlation matrix. So this is a correlation matrix I'm showing here for all the 24 parameters. So you can see of course, correlation is symmetric, covariance matrix are all symmetric kind of matrices. So these matrix comes here, and you can see PGA is highly correlated with PGV. The correlation is just 0.89. But when the PGA and magnitude is also highly correlated, but PGA is not correlated to other parameters like Q value, sigma, and it correlates positive with some numbers, negative with some numbers itself. So similarly, you can find out VSI, some of them are comes here is now this is a 21 dimensional space or 24 dimensional space, whether I can reduce dimension so that based on that one I can decide which time history maximizes the damage to my structure. So now you see, so the principal components we do here, it is very straightforward and very simple. So now for this correlation matrix, you have to just find out this is eigenvalues and then this is eigenvectors itself. So if we find out the eigenvalues and eigenvectors, so these are the eigenvalues. The first eigenvalue is the maximum variance, so 9.32, then 3.88, like that it comes. So you can see 24 parameters are there, so you will get 24 eigenvalues. But if you see the first 5 or 6 eigenvalues, they themselves are very dominant. Apart, others are all very small, and even you can neglect it. So which means although we're talking about 24 dimensional space, maybe it is not 24 dimensional. It is maybe 4 or 5 dimensions itself are sufficient to explain this data. And this is a table which I'm showing percentage variance and cumulative also. Like see, the first one can explain 38.86% variance in the data set itself. Now, when you add PC1 and PC2, say 55% is explained by these two PCs. If you go up to PC10 or PC9, 90% of the variances is explained by this the 9 parameters itself. So which means there is some duplicate information is available, so we can reduce our dimensionality of the problem itself. So this is how the PCs they look like, just the numbers for PGA, PGV, and PGD. So some PCs, PGA is a positive, we have got this eigenvector, whereas other variables you can have a negative eigenvector can have a sign change also. So this is how you can do this eigenvectors and eigenvalues. And now if you plot all these PC1 versus PC2, all the parameters, you can see there are 24 parameters are there, like V by H, SW, EW, this frequency and others. So you can see all these 24 parameters nicely, they will cluster into PGV, PGD, CAV, VSI, ASI, all of them are nicely correlated here. So this is basically one group you can identify. Then there is one more group here which characterizes the duration kind of thing. TCD, the significant duration, energy, PGV by PGAQ, they all fall under another group kind of a thing, cluster. And you are having one more cluster here which is followed slightly big here, and it contains all the frequency information. So this is like amplitude, then this is a frequency, and then this is a duration actually. So now you can see the 24 dimensional space can be reduced to 3 groups itself. So principal components helps us to identify the clusters. If you're having many parameters, you can decrease the dimensionality, and it helps you to identify the clusters, the similarities and other things you can detect from this PCA. And now you can do some more analysis, like for the scores of first PC versus second PC, you can plot for all the ground motion data. So you can identify easily some very interesting things also here. So this PC1, PC2, when you plot, say this is, if you take this as a 0 amplitude kind of a thing, and when the data, if it is far away from this axis, so this creates a huge damage on the structure actually. So now these are the time histories which are far away from the origins. They cause huge damage to the structure because the parameters are more, or the distance is very far away from this 0, 0 axis, and you can easily find out which is the most damage record itself. So now, so that is the advantage of principal component analysis. So as to just summarize, so principal component analysis is same as your principal stresses, principal planes, which you have studied in mechanics of materials, and it is a linear kind of a thing actually. And the advantage of principal components is you can reduce the dimensions, and you can identify clusters. You can also identify the groups itself in the data. So that helps you in reducing the dimension. So if you can reduce the dimension, you can understand the problem in a nice fashion. So now you see we move from linear to non-linear kind of a thing. So this figure I already showed you, the linear regression principal components. Now we will go towards non-linear principal component analysis. So how do we do this? Now in principal component analysis linear, so you look at straight lines. In non-linear principal components, the same database, we try to fit some type of the curves kind of a thing. So now here to do this non-linear principal components, it is very difficult, and this can be done only by the neural networks. So now, as already I showed you in the morning, so in the neural network, the non-linearity comes due to this neurons, and we have that sigmoidal function, the tan sigmoidal function itself are there. So this is how the neural network comes actually. So now in the olden days, we call as nonlinear principal component analysis, but nowadays this is known as autoencoders also. So autoencoders also, they use for this dimensional reduction here. So in MATLAB, there is nothing like NLPCA. They call as autoencoder. So autoencoder is more or less same as you see NLPCA itself. So and of course deep learning, that is comes for this NLPCA itself. So like here you can see. So this is a typical neural network here. So X1, X2, X3. So these are three inputs. So now I know. So what to do is there is one hidden layer here. This hidden layer consists of 4 neurons here, and then you see these 4 hidden neurons. They have been reduced to one. One more neuron is here at the center. So this is, so it is something like a 3-dimensional space. So this is 3D space. We are reducing it to, you see, 1-dimensional space here. So this portion is, what we call as you followed, right? Decoding kind of a thing, decoding kinds, from 3D to this itself, or maybe encoding extraction kind of thing. So you are extracting a pattern from these 3 inputs actually. So this you have reduced the dimension from 3D to 1 dimension, and then from 1 dimension, so you should go back to the original data set itself. So same hidden layers are here itself also, and output is also once again X1, X2, X3 actually. So this is a typical type of a neural network where you have inputs are X1, X2, X3, and outputs are also X1, X2, itself. So inputs are same, outputs are also same. Only thing here is, we are not interested in input or output. We are interested in this, the hidden one, that is Z1, that is a dimensionality. So like here I'm showing you this typical example. So here you are having X1, X2, X3. So the data is like this, all the blue dots. So now X1, X2, X3, whatever the blue dots in this coordinate system will go as inputs here. Now this Z1 is nothing but this red one. You can see here, the red one is nicely passes through all the data. So this is your nonlinear, the principal component. So it is not a straight line as you see in the PCA. So this is a nonlinear curve kind of a thing, but you can see this nicely passes through the data. So the full 3D problem has been reduced to, you see, a 1-dimensional problem itself. So this is advantage, you see, of the nonlinear PCA. So where, the inputs, outputs, both of them are same. Only thing, you see, we are trying to reduce the dimension of our problem itself. So this portion is generally, you see, we call it as extraction kind of a thing. That means you are extracting a pattern from the data, and this is, you see, decoding kind of a thing, or generation. Once again, you go back actually. Okay. So now the problem is, you see, like this. So as already I told you, so this is the input neurons. So you have it and hidden neurons here. So these are also hidden neurons, and this. Okay. So now here we want to, you follow it, reduce the dimension here. Now in this problem, input is same, output is same. So hidden layers, H is nothing but, a function Wx into X plus B kind of a thing, where B is the bias I told you in the morning itself. And now this U, that is this bottleneck neuron or this dimensional reduction or the principal component is, it comes from the hidden nodes. You see F2, you can write as once again as in terms of sigma delta. And now once you have this user, now once again you do this decoding kind of a thing, which is, F3 kind of thing, and then you are having this F4 kind of a thing. So now you can see the weights here, there are a number of weights will be. So if 3 are there, so 2, so 3 by 2 is a 6 here, and then you have biases here, then you have a 2 by 1, and once again you see you have a bias here. So you can calculate the weights. So now the weights and biases have to be found out by this minimization. So you can see the minimization is very, very typical kind of a thing. Input is X, output is also X itself actually, but there will be some type of error because we are reducing the dimension. So you minimize the error between input and output kind of a thing. It's X minus X dash whole square kind of a thing. But now in principal components, so what we try to do here is, because there are so many number of unknowns will be there, because you can see only 3 dimensions and the number of unknowns are there, to better constrain the problems here. What to do is, you see, we say that the mean value of U, say, so this will be 0, and its variance is somewhere, you see, 1 kind of a thing also. Some more constraints, we try to put it to get some better results itself. So the unknowns are, you see, WB, WB. That means, you see, the weights between input to hidden, then hidden to this neuron, then from here to this one, and from here to this itself actually. So all the things have to be minimized by your optimization procedure. And now what we do, this is a 1-dimensional kind of a thing. Now we can have even 2 dimensions also. Like, we can check whether it is really 1 dimensions or 2-dimensional data. So what we do is we first fit for 1 dimension and check whether it works or not. Suppose if the error is too much, then we add one more rise in the neuron here itself, and then we can try to find out whether it is a 3-dimensional data to 2D or 1-dimensional kind of a thing. We can verify from this networks itself. So now we have to find out all these weights by minimizing this, the mean square error. And now you can see, so this if M is the number of hidden neurons and L is the input data size, say. So the number of unknowns will be say, 2LM plus 4L plus L plus 1. So here the unknowns are huge actually. So in the morning when I showed you the regression analysis, in regression what happens is you have input neuron, you have hidden neurons, and you have one output actually. But here what is happening here is, from here you have not only the two hidden layers are there, and then you see once again you have the outputs here itself. So the number of unknowns becomes very, very more. And if you increase the hidden neurons, the nonlinearity of the network increases. So if the nonlinearity of the network increases, sometimes you may lead to overfitted solutions kind of a thing. So what one does in practice is you minimize error. You have some more weights to give the penalty kind of a thing. So that this is a penalty, that is a WKI, that is weights. You are minimize these weights are also very, very smooth kind of a thing. So we do maximization, minimization for this data set. So because the number of unknowns are more and the nonlinearity is high in the network, so you have to minimize, you follow right these smoothening things also. Otherwise, you may get some erroneous results kind of a thing. So now I will just demonstrate this for our response spectra. So morning I showed you how to predict the response spectra for a given magnitude, distance, and then VS direct and then the focal mechanism. Now here I want to reduce the dimensionality of the problem. Generally, these response spectra, x-axis will be natural time period, and y-axis is your spectral acceleration itself. So now the x-axis for response spectra is not fixed actually. So it goes from 0 to infinity in principle. But generally, what we do is we compute up to 1 hertz, 1 second, or 4 seconds, or 5 seconds, because our structural, there are no structures is about 10 seconds or something like that. So we go only up to that one and we close it. And then this is sampling of response spectra. So if you want, you can calculate at very fine time periods, like every 0.001 second you can calculate, or even 0.01, or you can sample with 1,000 points or 5,000 points, or how many, depending on this analysis itself. So many samples are also required. So now the question here is, this is how the people calculate the response spectrum. Like if you have any time history, say that L center, whatever acceleration is here, you give this and its response, the maximum value, you pick it up, and similarly you repeat for 1 second, 1.5 second, 2 second, 2.5, 3 second. You calculate the maximum values, you plot it in the graph, you will get the response spectrum. So here it is a displacement response spectrum. If you multiply by, I think, omega or another one, you will get your acceleration response spectrum. So this graph you will get it. So now here the question is, you see, how do we get the response spectrum? What should be the sample? Whether you have to sample at every 0.1 second or 0.001 second, or how many samples are required to represent the spectra correctly. So this is how the correlation, the plot for the response spectrum shown here. So this is a period and this is a period. You can see this is our 45 degrees line, that is 1. So if the data is very close, like for example, you see 1 second and 1 second actually. Of course, both are same, it is 1. So 1 second is closely correlated to, the nearby the 0.95, 0.9 we get. But 1 second, if you try to compare with, 0.1 or 0.01, the numbers are, the correlations decreases. So now what here we do is the nonlinear principal component analysis we try here. So this is a typical NLPCA or autoencoder, you can say. So you can see these are the input neurons. Some 91 are there. So PGA, then spectral acceleration 0.02, and we have sampled at 0.01. So 91 input neurons are there, and these are hidden neurons. 8 hidden neurons are there. And then we tried with several dimensions. I'm showing you here with the 3-dimensional. So we want to reduce this 91-dimensional space to 3-dimensional space. And then this is extraction, and this is a generation kind of a thing, or encoding, decoding kind of a thing also you can call. So you can see, and you are having this one. So input is also same, output is also same actually. So now here what we are interested is, input and output are same, but we are interested in this PC1, PC2, PC3 itself. So now here you can have to do a trial and error. You can take only one hidden neuron, that is a PC1, and then you can do the analysis. PC2, 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions or 5 dimensions, you can try with this one, and you can obtain what is optimum dimensionality of the problem. So now here the only problem, as already I mentioned you. So here the unknowns will be extremely high in nonlinear principal components. So you have 91 thing are there, and you have having 8 hidden neurons. So the number of unknowns will be 91 times 8 here, and here it will be 8 times into 3, then 3 into 8, and then 8 into 91, and you have to include all the biases of these hidden neurons and then this one. So the the network. So that's why you see we call this as deep learning, because the number of unknowns are very high. So here we are not interested in the output or something. What we are interested is the dimensionality reduction itself. So this is generally you see autoencoder kind of a thing, or sometimes the people what they call in textbooks as stacked encoders. Like here from 91 we have come to 8. The dimensionality has reduced from 91 to 8, and from 8 once again we are reducing it to 3. So it is something like we are using two auto encoders, fast stacked encoder kind of a thing. So from 91 dimensions we came to 8, and from 8 we have come to 3 dimensions. And once again from it's extraction kind of a thing, 8, and then once again the 91. Because the number of unknowns are extremely high, say, so the optimization you have to do in a very proper kind of a thing you have to do here. So you have to have a error function, and then you see we have to minimize the weights also. Otherwise, you will get erroneous results kind of a thing, or overfitted solutions you get. So we do this wi square also, this lambda you can see here. Instead of error, minimizing the error, we also minimize this weights of. That means the weights are very smooth. So the solutions will be smooth, so that the noise and other things can be eliminated from our network. And now this problem with this type of things is they're very complex, and they take huge computational time also, because the number of unknowns are very high. Now here I am showing you, if you take 20 pieces, that means there are 20 neurons are there here. So then this is a percentage variance we get here. Like all the 20 neurons, you can see the first, second, or fourth neuron 60%, 70%. Of course, they are arranged in increasing order. So around 98% of the variance will be explained from this. So if you do 15 pieces, say, you will get this type of numbers: 10 pieces, 5 pieces, 3 pieces, and then 2 pieces. Now the optimum you can see for 3 pieces, say, automatically you see the first piece itself explains 95% of the data set itself. Now to choose this one, these are the predictions. So the red one, black one shows the recorded data. That is exactly the data how it is. Now this yellow one, say, this has come by using 15 pieces. That is from 91 dimensions, we have reduced it to 15 dimensions. Then this is a yellow one. And now if we keep on decreasing this one, the things becomes very smooth actually. Okay, because we are reducing the nonlinearity in the model. The overfitting has been reduced here. So you can see with the 3 pieces, say, the data you see exactly it matches with the recorded data. And if you still reduce the pieces, it goes away. And if you increase the pieces, you will get weird the kind of results itself. So now based on this trial and error kind of procedure, it shows that 15 dimensions, 20 dimensions are not required. Maybe you say 5, 3, or 2 itself may be sufficient to represent the response spectrum itself. So based on other kind of studies, you see, we found out that 3 dimensions is the best thing to represent this response spectra. So there is no need to represent response spectra from 91 dimensions. You can reduce it with only 3 pieces. 3 pieces are sufficient to reproduce back the data itself. So this is how it shows. Like we have found out is the R square value, then PP as a standard deviation or something. You can see now R values for when you do 20 pieces, is very low, which means the nonlinearity in the network is very high, and the number of, because the number of nodes are also very high, so we're getting very bad the numbers itself. Now when it comes to 3 pieces, say, automatically you see the data you will get almost 0.99, which means it is a very good. 2 pieces, of course you see once again the variance reduces. So now the performance pattern sigma error kind of a thing, because 2 pieces error increases, although the correlation coefficient is more or less similar. So based on this, so we can say that response spectra from 91 dimensions you can reduce to nonce. So now you can find out PC1, PC2, PC3. Now we have got this, the 3 neurons kind of a 3 principal components instead of the response spectra itself. So morning lecture I showed you, we printed the entire response spectra itself. But now here what we are doing is we have reduced the response spectra to 3 dimensions. If you predict these 3 dimensions, that itself is sufficient. You can get back to response spectra. So here you see we have done this input layer, hidden layer, and then this output layer here. Now magnitude, VS30, rupture distance all are same, but one is PC1, PC2, and then PC3. So now you can see the morning you see the unknowns was extremely high. Now with this PC set, the unknowns are very less, like 5 into 5, then 5 into 3 kind of a thing, and then you have this bias. So the number of unknowns have significantly decreased compared to the morning regression analysis, and you can get very nice results from this from the database. So now as already regression. So because the data is coming from several groups, several earthquakes, right? So obviously, when you want to do this one, you have to minimize not just the error, you have to minimize error in each group from group to group also. That's what I told you, inter-event and intra-event kind of a thing, or inter-group, intra-group kind of a thing. You have to minimize, and you have to plot all the biases, errors, and other things to get some meaningful conclusions. These are the inter-event, the residuals. You can see all of them are very close to zero, which means the bias is almost zero. Intra-event, that is error in a group. So because as I told you, right, in a group, because for earthquake you have a lot of records, so this will be higher than the inter kind of a thing, and you can see the scatter is oscillate around 0, 1, 0, etc. So these were PC1, then PC2, and PC3. So now you see these are the standard deviations, inter-event and intra-event standard deviation. And already I told you this, these are the standard deviations. And now if you try to compare, so the previous one are almost close. The morning one was directly predicting the response spectra. Now what we're doing is we're not predicting the response spectra. We are predicting the principal component. That's the PC1, PC2, and PC3. Once you know PC1, PC2, PC3 from your network, you can get back to spectrum. So the idea is like, so this PC1, PC2, PC3, we are predicting from magnitude, distance, and other. So once we get PC1, PC2, PC3, so you can give in this network, that is in this auto encoder, and you can generate back your response spectrum. So this is how we are doing. So there are two networks. One network is to predict PC1, PC2. So now this also is the reducing the dimensionality and then working on the data also. It works very nicely fine, and then you see it almost it matches very well with the morning neural network, and it also matches with the conventional statistical. Everything is captured by this network, and if you try to extrapolate also, it is able to give some nice results, etc. So now I showed you this nonlinear principal components, on the response spectra. Now I will show you something more, the complicated kind of thing. That is, you see the auto encoders itself. So here, we use this deep learning techniques itself. So now here, this is a little bit complicated and more, and it requires a lot of computational effort also, even in the MATLAB and others. So computational efficiency also becomes very important to do this type of studies. So now here, what we are trying to do is, the no response spectra. We would like to do directly work with the time history itself. That is, the instrument records time histories, and then we are using this time histories to plot response spectra, and we are working on the response spectra. But here, what we want to do is we want to directly model the encoders. So autoencoder and linear principal NLPC, both of them are same, but autoencoders, you see, it's already inbuilt commands are there in MATLAB, and you can do it very computationally, efficient codes they have written, functions are there in MATLAB, which can save a lot of time. So now we want to compute the acceleration time histories, and then this compressed time histories, magnitude, VS30 or whatever, this is the closest distance to point or something. So this is the idea here. So these are original acceleration time histories we have. So we want to compress this auto encoder, it can compress and then generate your predicted also. So this compressed time history where the dimensions have been reduced here. Now this we want to predict with magnitude, distance, and VS30. So this is exactly same as what I showed you previous response spectra. We directly want this acceleration time history. The reason for this is many who are in the designs, earthquake resistant design, what they generally do is we design structures using the IS code. You have used a response spectrum used for design of the structures. Then once you have done the design, generally what people do is they do a nonlinear analysis in SAP or something to identify the weak links where the plastic hinge gets formed, and then you see what are the weakest portions here. So to do a nonlinear analysis, they require this time history. So this acceleration time history should be compatible with the design response spectra. So if you can provide this acceleration time history, you can identify the plastic, or performance-based design you can do from this data set. So that's why these acceleration time histories are very demanding in nonlinear the structure analysis. So now here we are using neural network to this work. So now you see we use this database, like whatever database has been, the international global database we use. I already showed you morning and then now also. So we have magnitude, epicenter, VS30, all those information are available, and we have downloaded all the acceleration time histories, and all time histories, we just sampled for 4,096 points, and then the things are maybe that much amount of data we are using. And now instead of directly modeling the acceleration time histories, we do this Fourier transform actually. Okay, so when you do a Fourier transform of acceleration time history, you will get imaginary component, you also get a real component. And as you know, Fourier transform is symmetric, around the half. Like if you have frequency domain, 2048 points itself is sufficient, because you will get a real will be symmetric, the imaginary part will be asymmetric kind of a thing. So you record 2048 real parts and 2048 you follow the imaginary component. So instead of directly giving a time history, because it doesn't work, you do a Fourier transform, you train the auto encoders for this real component as well as the imaginary component. The real component is a 2048 is the imaginary component is there. So now here we will stack the auto encoders which are available in the MATLAB. So just 2 lines only, already the inbuilt command is there. So we try to decrease this dimensionality. So from 2048 we reduced to 400, and then from 400 we reduced to 220. So 2048 dimensionality to 400, then 400 dimensions to 20 dimensions. There are 2 auto encoders. First is 2048 to 400, then from 400 to 20 points itself. So finally, any acceleration time history can be compressed to only 20 points. Now, once you have a 20 points, what we are trying to do is you fit like I showed you a neural network to predict these 20 points for magnitude, distance, and VS30. So now you have another network which will produce these 20 points. Once you know these 20 points, you can give as a input in this auto encoder, and you can generate your acceleration time history itself. So that is the idea here. So now we use this auto encoder for this network itself. So you do this. So auto encoder you are doing a Fourier transform, you compress it, then you recover back, and then you do an inverse Fourier transform to get this acceleration time history. So this is how the network works. So this is what the stacked autoencoder here. I am showing you the figure. This is a very complicated neural network here. So this work was done long back in 1998 actually. Okay, so by these two professors in University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So at that time, this technique was not called as autoencoders. So we used to call this as a replicator neural network, because this is a network which replicates itself actually, because input is same, output is also same, because it's replicating the things. So they used to call as RNN or replicator neural network, but now we are calling this as stacked autoencoders. And in the olden days, this toolbox, these autoencoders were not available in MATLAB, so this has to be written in Fortran and other kind of softwares. But now MATLAB has these autoencoders, and the code is also very computationally very fast. So this is an acceleration time history here. So what we are doing is you do a fast Fourier transform. This is a real part and this is the imaginary part. Okay. So real part contains, these are 4096 points are there. So 2048 real parts and 2048 is imaginary. The total length is 4096 only. So you give this Fourier transform as input to this encoder, autoencoder. So imaginary part, real part. So 2048 neurons, the first 2048 contains real part. The next 2048 it contains the imaginary part. So now from 4096 neurons are here. So you compress them to 210 nodes. So 210 nodes are the dimensions here. So from 4096 we are compressing to 210 dimensional space. From 210 here, once again we are compressing it to 40 dimensions. So now this is a trial and error. You have to choose like 40 or 20 or 30. You have to do several trials. Based on that, you have to construct your network. So this is extracting information. So now after this, we have to decode the data. So with this 40 nodes, once again you have 210, and once again you see 4096. So now input is same, output is also same actually. So now you have to find out the weights. So you can see so many unknowns are there. Like for example, from 4096 input nodes, and these are 210 is a hidden node. So the number of unknowns are 4096 multiplied by 210. And plus 2 bias will be there for this hidden layers. And then from here to here, 210 into 40 plus 40 biases are there. And once again, 40 into 210 plus 210 biases. And from 210 to, once again 4096, and you are having 4096 biases. So almost, your number of unknowns will be, 10,000 or 20,000, the dimensionality, that many unknowns are there. And doing optimizations for this type of problems is extremely complex, because so many unknowns are there, and getting a unique solution is very difficult. And as already told you, we cannot just minimize the error. You also have to put several other constraints, like minimizing the weights and other things, such that it works in the practice kind of thing. So this exam. So this is our how the autoencoder looks like, and some autoencoders, like maybe in between 210 then 40 then maybe 20, then once again you reduce the dimensionality. So this itself is caused as one encoder, so one input and one hidden set. This is what they call as one encoder. Here this is two encoders are there, and these two encoders we have used. So if you want, you can use 3 or 4 or 5, but if you increase these encoders, the number of unknowns becomes very complex, but the nonlinear capability becomes increased. But at the same time, there is a chance of getting these overfitted solutions and complex things. And you have to have a balance kind of a thing. So you have the error minimization here, the gradient descent, back propagation, those algorithms doesn't work. Maybe you may have to go for some global optimizations to get an the global minimas. So this is how we have also done here. So this is one time history you can see here. So the blue one shows the predicted one. This is the original one. So the original time history is here. So what we have done is this original time history, you do a Fourier transform, you separate real part, you separate imaginary part, given the network, and then you compress it to 20 nodes or 40 nodes, and then you generate back. So we were able to compress up to 20 neurons itself. You can see, so it nicely, it is able to reproduce the data, in a fantastic fashion. So now from, for 4096 points dimensions, we have been able to reduce to almost, this 20 dimension space. Now, similarly, of course, it works for some, but some this time history you can see the autoencoder performance is not up to the mark, but some time histories, it works very nicely. Now, similarly, so this other time histories also we have done here, and like this, we are just trying to compare how many dimensions it works, like 20 or 40 or something. We are trying to do this type of works. So this is how the real part, and then the imaginary part is there. How this autoencoder it gives back this predicts these numbers. So that this work is under follow, right? The progress and these auto encoders are very very complicated kind of a thing. So I just wanted to summarize my talk here. So now I have discussed you see from morning to morning session as well as in this session. I have shown you these applications of ANN itself. So my morning lecture was on the regression analysis, and the next afternoon lecture was on dimensional reduction itself. I have shown you these nonlinear principal components, and in this lecture I have shown you the principal components, starting with the linear principal components. Then we went to nonlinear principal components, and then we went to this autoencoders, which are very complex, and the computational difficulty is also very high. And as already I told you, nowadays, this developing sensors is a very active, the area of research. Now we are also doing, as I already mentioned like 30 lakhs instrument which used to cost 10 years back. Now it is costing something around is 1 lakh or is 50,000. So developing this type of a sensors is a very active area in research, and you see, so this essentially these sensors only had made this neural network very very popular. And now when the data sets are 20 points or 100 points or something, no need to do, don't go for neural networks. It's an ordinary conventional statistics, that works much better than this neural network. It is something like you are complicating your own thing. And now when you're having, you see, a large data set, like 10,000 dimensions, 20,000 dimensions, or 50,000, or 1 lakh records, as already I told you, when the data is so huge, our humans will not be able to understand this data dimensions, data 10,000 dimensions. It goes above our mind. So here the best thing is, you see, this artificial intelligence works very nicely in practice. So if the data is very small, is a very small thumb rule. If the data is very small, like 100 or 200, our conventional things are much better. But the data is so large, how we fail, but computers work in a nice fashion for this large database. And now structural health monitoring I showed you in the morning also, now also. So this is also a very active area in research now, as already I told you, because the sensors have become very cheap. And now like many bridges in India, like for example the Pamban Bridge, many bridges, or many tall buildings, like in Bombay, new tall building is going to come up. So all the buildings, all the bridges nowadays, they are instrumented, because sensors are very cheap, and the continuous monitoring is happening, and you see huge amounts of databases are getting created for these bridges. As I already told you in the morning, when there is a large data set, humans can easily interpret, but the small wiggles in the data set, we delete them as a noise kind of a thing. So this is where you see the neural networks are very popular, and they can do a much better job rather than us itself. So in the structural health monitoring, people have started working on the neural networks for conclusions. So this is a very important area where neural networks, there is a lot of scope to do this neural networks, and in epicenter and magnitude determination. So this is a very active area. You may be knowing USGS, United States, they have this ANN based itself. So it is when the data comes automatically, the instrument records. So you have a artificial intelligence tool. It looks at the data, it processes it, and it automatically finds out epicenter and the magnitude, and automatically actually. So these are very important, for tsunami warning, earthquake warning purpose network, and in research in earthquake engineering itself. And now coming to structure analysis and design, neural network right now, honestly speaking, you see, there are research papers are there, but in practice or something, we don't have, people are not using this neural network. They go by the conventional techniques itself. But in future, say the next 10 years or something, because so many designs are there, so many things, data comes up, and as I told you, the sets have become very cheap, and everybody has started testing RCC, then steel. So much of data is getting generated. Maybe in future, when the data set becomes very large, say, so this neural network may become very popular in this area itself. So some of this, some of you are very interested in this areas, especially in structures. There is a lot of scope for neural networks right now, because the large amount of data is getting generated, and it is becoming very difficult for humans actually to interpret this data. And this is where you really require this artificial intelligence. And in earthquake engineering, there is no, it's like a motion kind of thing. It goes only by data. A lot of applications have come up recently. So whatever I showed you in the afternoon lecture, you can, if you have followed, it's fine. But if you want more information, so you can get from these papers. We have published in last year or something, 2018 or something. So this is on the linear principal component analysis. So where I have showed you the PCA and others, I've discussed in this paper. And this is also one more paper which we published recently on the nonlinear principal component analysis, which is nothing but these autoencoders. So these papers are available, the online, where the dimensional reduction. So you can download this, and whatever I presented, say, it is available in these papers, and you can study. And then if you have any doubts, you can find out. And this is my ResearchGate, the website. So all my papers are available online in ResearchGate. You can go to my website, so you can download the papers itself. And now that autoencoders work, we are currently working on it, and we're writing a paper. Maybe in the future it may come. So now you can go to my website and you can see the updates, and you can download all my papers on neural network if you are interested. And speaking, you see, morning I also showed you, now also I showed you the best book. Some of you are asking, I showed you that William C's book. It's a very good book, for to start, on this neural network, on principal components, and on this nonlinear principal component analysis. So with this, I close my lecture.